Hi, everyone. Welcome to another AI Fireside Chat. Today, I am joined by Jeff Francis. Jeff is the founder and CEO of N08, a firm in the Dallas area where we're located. I first met Jeff a few years ago when he was a guest on my In the Thick of It podcast. And over time, he's become a good friend. We get together, chat here and there about all kinds of things, including, as you might have guessed, AI. Over the years, we've had just incredible, fascinating conversations, and I think he's got a lot to add to our conversation today. Jeff is a practitioner. He is somebody that is deeply embedded in leveraging AI with their clients and things that they're doing internally. And in this conversation, we touch on a number of things. What should you be doing with your kids around AI? How do we prepare them to operate in the AI world? One of the other things that I really appreciate that he brought to light is this concept that, much like we would with an employee and with a job description, we've got to make sure that we're keeping their duties, their responsibilities really narrowly focused so that we can have the outputs that we desire. And with that, hope you get a lot out of this fireside chat. All right. Well, we did our first AI fireside chat about a month ago with Kevin Schuler, and it was a lot of fun and got a lot of feedback, and want to kind of keep this rolling. So with me is Jeff Francis from N08. He was a guest on my podcast In the Thick of It, and over the last couple of years, become a good friend. He's got all kinds of great ideas. He and his firm, N08, are doing a lot of innovative things with AI, and man, grateful to have you on a fireside chat today.
Yeah. I love the idea of connecting that. Me and you've talked about a lot of this offline, and the conversations are really good. So it's a great idea to just try to capture those on a recording and share those out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, as we were kind of prepping for this, there were some topics that we both came up with, and I love some of the things that you brought up. Let's talk about the future of work and adoption of agents. How do you think this is going to impact workers? How do people prepare for the shift that's happening? There's a lot there, so go
Yeah.
wherever you want with it.
Yeah. It's a huge topic. And I think it's ultimately just a guess from everybody. Right now, I think the only thing we know is certain is it is going to be very disruptive to work. And I think, as I think about it, the best advice that I could give anybody, regardless of role, is you have to start learning about it and understanding how it works today, like now, not a year from now. That includes, workers already in the workforce. But I think me and you had mentioned, like, what do we tell our kids? They're younger and they're looking forward to, like, what are they going to do? That's something that I've already started to work on for my 12-year-old daughter is sort of a curriculum on how can I start encouraging her to start using AI as little projects and incentivize her to begin to understand the tool, because I just feel like no matter what path she chooses, it's going to be relevant in professional and personal life. And so, the same thing applies, I think, towards the workforce, is that we know it's going to be really disruptive. The best mitigation that we can do against that is learn how to leverage it and be on the front edge of that. I think that to me seems like sort of a near term, midterm sort of approach. Longer term, I wonder if it's inevitable that it does replace the need for a lot of people potentially, which kind of seems like the reality. And so there's probably this whole other conversation about, well, what happens if the longer term vision that you hear a lot of people talk about becomes true, where it really does reduce the need for as much like human labor or human capital, and combined with other things like robotics and along with AI and that kind of stuff. When people say that cost will dramatically come down, how does that just sort of change the way that we just live our lives in general? So I think that's way out there and that's pretty fuzzy, but I think the long-term impact could be way bigger than what we expect. But I do think that there is opportunity in the near term and even like medium term of like just deciding that this is here, it's changing things at an exponential rate, and if you want to be successful, you have to start looking at least learning how this stuff can be used.
Um, I love how you talked about working with your daughter and kind of preparing her and trying to develop a curriculum for her to kind of learn. When we talk about our kids, though, safeguards are something that come to mind. Like, are you monitoring her chats? Are there some guardrails and whatever tools that you're using? How have you navigated that?
Yeah, I'm in all transparency, I'm in the early stage of that, so it's more like I've created a rough curriculum, and so we haven't started on it yet, but I think my thoughts around how I am going to manage that is the answer is yes, I will review those chat sessions. That will be kind of like how we treat her phone and any electronics right now, is that it's an open door policy. It's a privilege, not a right, and that means that mom and dad have the ability to review that stuff anytime, and however they want. I think the first approach would be like using that sort of same rule for that. And then I think beyond that, there are some parental controls on, some like a chat GPT and that kind of thing, where you can set up like accounts and apply permissions and that kind of thing. I'll certainly want to review like what kinds of things I can put in place, proactively, just kind of like with everything else with YouTube or, web browsing, that kind of stuff. But I think that the real fallback is you can't just let them run loose on it. You have to be reviewing it.
Um, with our kids, two of our three are of the age that we've given them phones, and from the onset, it was, hey, look, we have the right at any time to
Yeah.
get your device and go through it. And with our kids, we've also got iPads, and so thankfully, with messages, they sync across devices, and we can
See
grab
those.
the tablet when they're
Yeah.
not around if we need to, and we can scroll through. But you know what would be great for the big AI companies to do is, if there was like a little toggle in your Claude or your Chat GPT or Gemini window or whatever to
Yeah.
say, hey, I want to look at my kids' accounts and have that linked and be able to go through and scan that.
Yeah.
I think that they're going to have to come up with some better way for parents to have oversight on what their kids are doing.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I think they're, yeah, 100%. But even if they do, I think as parents, we can't put our faith in that, right? Like the old fashioned direct inspection is going to be something that, the consequences of not covering it are too great to like trust well-intended safeguards. But like direct inspection and close supervision, because I don't think it's something, in my mind at least, what I have in mind for our daughters, it's not like I'm just going to turn her loose on it. It's sort of these very sort of micro sessions, where like she completes a project, so being able to like review those along with her and keep them in little small bite sizes, especially until there's sort of a certain comfort level there of, what they can get into and how they can use the tool and that kind of thing. I think will be really important.
Yeah. Um, Talking about, advising kids on careers, something I heard on a podcast in the last probably 2 months was, um, this is actually more from the mindset of investors and where investors are starting to shift their cash.
Yeah.
They were talking about a move to things that are very much in the physical world. So
Hmm.
I don't remember the exact stats, but earlier in the year, Caterpillar, big yellow uh, machines we see building
Yeah.
things all over the place. Apparently, their stock was on a tear for a while, and they're speculating. Some of that is obviously there's a lot of data center build, and they're heavily involved in that. But also, as some knowledge work does get impacted, things in the physical world are still going to be here.
Yeah.
And I I think that's a brilliant sentiment, but I also start to think about, okay, if Elon has
Right.
millions of
How long will that
Optimus
last?
robots, is it going to be robots that are out there tying rebar and doing these construction jobs at some point? And I personally think that that is way off into the future,
Yeah.
but I do think that there is a reality that even some things in the physical world are going to get automated through bots.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same camp. I think it will come. I do think it'll take a while, before those really become true replacements. But in the more near term, my own experience with AI, and I try to push on that and try to understand that a whole lot. But one thing that I do see happening is that creativity and the ability to identify, observe, think through clearly what is a problem or what is an opportunity, like that's still something that's very human and valuable. And what it, people that are really good at that thing, they can skip a lot of the obstacles to getting to a solution now, and definitely will be more so in the future. And so I think that you it, there's a big opportunity where if you can not only with like kids but like with employees too, helping them to sharpen that skill, like the skill of like seeing opportunities, like like being very clear about what the real pain or the problem is and what a potential solution could look like. Now you can jump to that solution in a fraction of the time that it took before, and that presents really good opportunities. So I mean, I think in essence it's sort of building the sort of entrepreneurial skill set, I think, is a good hedge. And I think that will last long enough that it's good advice for people in the workforce right now, to think that way. But also to, for kids they're growing up, I think that, if you build that skill, and even if the picture changes dramatically because of AI, I still think that skill will serve them regardless of what the future world looks like. This sort of adaptability, this ability to look at things, see opportunity, figure out solutions, that's still like a killer skill set, right? And maybe it won't stop from, being displaced from employment, but it seems like a really good place to hedge your bet.
Yeah. Um, I spring break was a couple weeks ago, and we drove to Colorado and drove back. So had 28 hours in the car.
Nice.
And so I listened to a bunch of audiobooks and a bunch of podcasts on the drive. And I just finished a book by Bill Gurley, who's a venture capitalist, big name in the investment space.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote a book called Running Down a Dream. And it's written for anyone, but it's his mentality going into it was he wanted to write a book to help young people trying to figure out their career, and for parents to help their kids kind of advise on careers.
Interesting.
And he touches a little bit on AI here and there, but moreover, I would highly recommend it to any young person who is in high school or college and is trying to figure out what they want to do career wise.
Yeah.
And I would also recommend it for parents so that they can start kind of helping coach the kids. Again, not super AI centric, but while we're on the topic of kids and careers, just thought I'd
Totally.
Throw that out there.
Yeah. What's the name of the book again?
It's called Running Down a Dream.
Running Down a Dream.
Bill Gurley, Gurley. It was a really, really good read.
Awesome.
Lot of
I'll check that out.
Great career advice, and somewhat AI agnostic, very AI agnostic, but
yeah.
Yeah.
We may even see, before we move off this, I mean, we may even see a boost in some of the roles. Like like one of the things I've seen recently this week is the number of software engineering jobs is like up, actually, right? And I know that we're seeing an uptick in our business, the last, 4 or 5 months. Some of it I think is stirring, opportunity up because people are more aware of, hey, I can do things that maybe I couldn't do before. So it is possible that in the shorter run, there may be a boost. And I think in a lot of respects, software development is kind of the canary in the coal mine for AI's impact on the workforce, because it's sort of the first one to get impacted the most, and other career paths or other vocations can sort of look at that as a template of what they might expect as AI extends its reach. But I was surprised to see that. I actually kind of expected to see it go the other way, but at least the data I've seen is actually indicating that the engineering jobs are going up right now. And so and it certainly feels like that in the market from what we're seeing. And so I think there could be like an uptick before maybe like a downward trend.
That's interesting. A couple thoughts on that. One, depending on who you listen to, there are some people that are saying AI is actually going to create a whole new generation of entrepreneurs because it 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 lowers barriers to entry, and you've got incredible tools at your disposal to go create something new.
Yeah, yeah,
And I do think that there is some validity to that, but we'll see how it plays out. I also think that if all of a sudden you've got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, starting something new,
yeah,
how much demand is there in the market for all these different things? And
right,
if you only need to make X amount to be able to feed your family and live the way you want to live, then you don't have to build a $1 billion company. But
yeah,
I don't know. It'll be interesting to see kind of the macroeconomic impact of lots and lots of you know solopreneurs or whatever. But
totally.
talking about the software side of things, I wrote a post on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, and from where I sit, the types of careers that I think are most impacted today are
Definitely.
software developers, number one,
Yep.
um, and I think marketing, number two. And I don't know
Yeah.
if there's been near as much displacement in marketing yet, but with the tools available, it's certainly accelerating the speed with which people can create content and develop marketing plans and strategy and so forth.
Yeah.
But I want to, going back to, you're actually thinking there's an uptick. Block, the parent company for Cash App, and Square, the payments, they
Yeah.
just laid off like 40% of their
Yeah. I saw that.
staff. Um, like within a week, some other major tech company had a pretty similar thing. Do you think, how much of that do you attribute to, hey, these companies have just, they've gotten bloated, they've been fat, dumb, and happy for too long, and AI is the excuse for them to go cut a bunch of waste, versus no, AI is truly transforming this business, and they genuinely don't have that need.
Yeah. My hunch is it's a great cover fire for cutting bloat, but I also think there's a decent element of it that they're seeing real results from using sort of agentic AI in the business. But I think maybe one of the catalysts was when Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it into X, how massive the cut was there. And I mean they had a huge head count, they cut it massively, and they've continued moving the product forward, right? Some would argue that the product's better than it was before. And I think a lot of the Bay Area execs look at that and they're probably getting grilled by their board going, okay, like Elon just chopped, the majority of the team and their product is moving forward more rapidly, maybe headcount and, cushy sort of accommodations isn't the way that we really build. And I think, you know, I would speculate that that block cut probably had a lot to do with them deciding they were going to take a deep cut at it, and they could probably remove a lot of bloat. But it's also combined with them definitely seeing like real results in being able to employ agentic AI into the business. So I think it's a mix of both of them, but I definitely think there's an element of it's a good opportunity to really get lean, and they've seen other people do that very visibly, and so they're more willing to like take a crack at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk specifically about agents for a minute.
Sure.
Um, I'd love to get your take. how would you define an agent?
This is a good question. It seems such a commonly used term, and for somebody that's pretty close to it, I mean, you too, right? It's sort of a nebulous term. I think right off the top of my head, it's probably I would define it as a very simplified and focused use that is repetitive for AI. My own experience, because I've tinkered a lot with sort of personally, like, we have a couple different ways that we're using AI in our business. And then there's sort of my personal interest of like almost experimenting with some science projects to just better understand it so that I have a better view of what I need to be trying to push our team on and that kind of thing. And so I've been working like OpenClaw's one that's been getting a lot of attention lately. And so I've worked a lot with OpenClaw. And, my experience is that as good as it is and as much of a wow factor as it had for me very early on, the more I started to try to stack capabilities and additional, instructions and policy and sort of procedure on things, it gets really tough to make it work reliably. And that's sort of like, that seems to be kind of the big theme of employing AI, is that it can be very good if it can stay focused on one thing, but as context starts to bloat and it has to remember more and it's relying on AI to sort of decide things that are important and dump things that it can't hold on to, then it stops doing things as reliably. And so I think, just from my own personal experience on using it, I think that agents become these very sort of narrowly defined AI like tools that focus on doing one particular thing really, really well. Right. And so you don't have to remember a whole lot. And it's not a good mental model I've found helps me a lot, is thinking about, well, like, how do humans do this? Right. So when you go to hire somebody, you don't say, okay, I need a software engineer and I also need them to do finance and I also need them to, handle like infrastructure for the business. Oh, and they need to do hiring. And you don't do that with people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think when I try to start figuring out how something about AI like works, it helps me a lot to think about, like, well, how do humans do this today? Like, if I need a really good developer, not only do I hire a developer, but I get really clear on like, what exactly does this particular developer need to be very good at? And you hire very specifically for that. And I think that's a good way to think about agents, is what does this agent need to be really good at? And I know that the more I try to dilute what all things I want them to be good at, the less good they're going to be at them.
Yeah. And something you mentioned a minute ago too was you talked about, I don't think you used the term context window, but ultimately that's what we're talking about. Eventually their memory fills and stuff starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
I do feel like that is going to be one of the next major leaps that the major models are going to have to fix, is dealing with increasingly large context windows. And with each release that all the majors are putting out, it does seem like the context window is increasing. But stuff that I've been doing over the last few weeks, analyzing massive amounts of data, like it breaks really, really quick. And so I'm eager to see that increase over time.
It'll be a huge breakthrough when somebody really figures out how to do that well, because like my experience of doing this is that's the limiting factor. Like, it can do the stuff. Like, I can tell it, this is how we want to do it, give it access to things, tell it when I want it done. And it does it like pretty well in most of the use cases that I've tried it. My problem occurs when I go, okay, you're doing that great. All right, let's also add this. Let's teach you how to do this. And then the thing that it was doing really well a week ago, it acts like it doesn't even know what I'm talking about when we try to repeat it, And so once they figure out, how to do that, that's going to be a huge breakthrough. And I think some of it someone figuring out kind of a great solution for that's going to be really a huge new inflection point. But in the meantime too, I think learning how to better work within those constraints is like what the work is for folks like me and you to do today.
Well, talking about OpenClaw, I personally have been very intrigued and haven't gone all the way through setting it up yet. We've got some folks internally that have built some pretty incredible stuff. But I think that with OpenClaw right now, as revolutionary as it is much more. I'll say it this way: my wife is not going to be able to go set up OpenClaw.
No.
Um,
Well, I don't know your
and
wife, but I see what the point is that you're making, right?
most people out there are not going to be able to do it. And
maybe not because they can't, but because they don't have the patience for it. Because I can tell you, like, I've really had my patience tested over the last month. And I have these cycles where I'm like, this is so awesome. I can't believe this is possible right now. Followed by, oh my God, like, am I just wasting my time trying to get this thing to be useful?
Well, I think that, and we've already seen it a little bit just in the last few weeks with Perplexity has launched their Perplexity computer, and with some of the enhancements that Claude has made to co-work. And
Nemo
I gotta
Claw,
believe
that was a good one.
Yeah, Nemo Claw though, I mean, it's built on top of the open source OpenClaw, and so it still is that, you know, you got to go into terminal, and it's kind of intimidating for the non-developer, non-techie.
I think Claude Cowork and all the updates Anthropic is doing is one of the ones that I'm watching the closest, because they're stacking like new capabilities, like it seems like every day,
constantly. And so I think that in the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see that type of agentic thing become much more approachable for the masses. And I genuinely believe that, you know, end of this year, early next year, I'm not going to say that OpenClaw is going to go away or Nemo Claw is going to go away, but I think that it's going to be much less relevant in the not too distant future. Because these other companies are going to make it just baked into the product. It'll be a very easy to use UI, and you'll be off to the races.
Yeah. It's got limitations, but it's got ease of use as the trade-off, you know?
Exactly.
And I think there's going to be a place for both of them. You know, I think that's part of the reason why I haven't really given up on the OpenClaw path as an option. I still use Cowork quite a bit. But I'm still holding out, even if it's a great learning experience with OpenClaw, to figure out like what can you do with sort of the open system of agentic AI versus a more closed system that kind of like Apple versus PC, like Apple just works and, you know, PC's more open. I think that's a little bit of kind of what I'm seeing there. I think one thing that's been fresh on my mind this week on this front is, I don't know if you're experiencing this or not, but this balance between buying into the hype, you know, of what's capable and possible right now versus how great can it actually do something. And if our experience is not matching up to the hype, is it because we're missing something and we got to close a knowledge gap, or is it because there's the hype machine out there, you know, talking about things in a way that leaves out like the important details of how short it falls? I don't know. Are you feeling that sometimes?
I'm feeling it constantly. And in fact, on the previous Fireside chat with Kevin Schuler, we talked about hype versus reality. And right now I feel like there's probably 80% hype and 20% reality out there. And there was back at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, I think it's Ken Griffin. I think he's the head of Citadel or one of these big investment funds. He was being interviewed, and they asked him about AI and specifically about AGI. And he had a really important take, and I'll paraphrase. He basically said, look, you've got Dario, you've got Sam Altman that are talking about how, you know, we are this close to AGI. Right. And he said, look, these guys have massive spend commitments, and they've got to keep cash coming in from investors to, to keep things going. Right. And so, of course, they're telling everybody that we are this close to AGI. And he said, I don't think we're anywhere near close to AGI. They've got to tell a story. They've got to sell a story to Wall Street. You got both Anthropic and OpenAI that are, poised to IPO sometime this year, and they're in an arms race to they're in an arms race to actually try to list before the other. And so I I think that not just with the big frontier models, but across the board, even in some of the more narrowly focused AI driven apps,
Yeah.
the results are more miss than hit.
Yeah. And I think, where I landed on this, because we've had a situation even just this week where we got pressed on, what someone thought was possible, and it doesn't match up against our experience so far, right? Like we're using
Yeah.
it heavy. We're really trying to move hard towards being AI native in our product development approach. And we have definitely seen big gains, right? Like super good, like value creation and it's exciting, but we still run into situations where we get faced with someone who thinks something is possible and it just doesn't quite match to what we're seeing on the ground. And I don't know if it's right or not, but as a leader, like the approach I'm trying to take to that is we don't need to get pushed into that if we don't feel like that's what's possible right now, but we don't need to discard it as not true. Right. And I think that's my way of filtering the hype is I'm not going to discard it as not true. I'm going to take it as what is the next step that we can take learning wise to figure out what we don't know yet, and I think as an organization, if we can get good at that process of just, it's the hype is saying that we can do this. We're not seeing that right now. What's the next incremental step for us? Like, where are we seeing like the next evolution, or the next sort of zone of discomfort that we can take without taking on too much risk? That's kind of how we're approaching it ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and going back to kind of what we started with was you can't just sit back. Like you have to start engaging these tools. You have to start figuring it out. And part of figuring it out is hitting a wall and saying, well, that doesn't work. I've got to do it the traditional way, or I've got to refine how I'm trying to tackle this problem to see if there's a way to push through with AI.
Yeah.
But you can't just dig your heels in and say, no, I'm not touching it.
Yeah. And it feels cliche, Scott, but I think that this whole notion of there's still learning in failure, I think it's even more true right now with the AI stuff, is because you try something with AI and it ultimately doesn't work out. There's a lot of valuable learning in that. And right now, learning is keeping up with a just breakneck pace of change. And so, I feel different about relating to trying things and it not really working all that well right now, because I do know that we're figuring out, we're getting, even the OpenClaw example I gave you, probably the most valuable thing I got from it is it gave me a much more clear picture of like where this stuff is going. It may not be there yet right now, but it opened the door and kind of the lights went on some for me on, I can kind of see like what this looks like a little bit better right now, even if it didn't do exactly what I want it to do right now very easily. But I think that's something that people have to like take on and just identify it properly, that the process of trying things out is where the value is right now, not necessarily like saying, okay, I can automate this process perfectly right now.
Yeah. Well, I've heard a lot of people say this over the last few years, but the current version of whatever thing you are using is the worst it will ever be. And
yeah.
And with each release, they fine tune and those things get better and better.
Yeah. Which are daily almost now. I mean, if you need proof, then just, I think, look at Anthropic. Like there's, I was talking with somebody like on our team yesterday that said, if you look at how fast they're releasing stuff, there's literally no way that it's not at least heavily doing what a lot of the hype is, right? You don't ship stuff that fast. And the other side of it, which we haven't talked about, which in more of the software development world, was how comfortable are we willing to get with not really understanding everything about how the code works that AI generates versus does it just work, right? And my comment to that question was there's no way that someone like Anthropic is completely in touch with how all the code is working that they're generating the only answer in my mind is they have to have gotten a comfort level with that it's more important that it works, and there's sort of some defined box that we're having it operate in. And so that, I think that's something for developers that are having to get comfortable with, is like, what do I need to do to make sure that I do feel comfortable with launching something, which may not be I understand exactly how the code works at a fundamental level.
Yeah. The counter that I would make, and I honestly think that it's more important to make progress than to have it perfect, but the trade-off is tech debt. And at some point down the road, whether that's days, weeks, months, or years, at some point you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff that you're going to have to go and clean up if it's not written well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then how can AI help you clean that up? I've seen some amazing like cleanup jobs that, Claude Code did in an hour on a code base that would have taken us a couple of weeks to refactor, in a recent example. And yeah, I think it's just everything about what we do has changed so dramatically,
Well, that's a good place to wrap. I think we could talk for hours and hours on end, but Jeff, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll do it again soon. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for the invite on. It was great chatting.
Thanks.